Welcome to the next edition of Grid Forward Chats. I'm Bryce Yonker with Grid Forward. Today we have with us Kellie Donnelly. It's mid-November and some big things have been happening. Thanks for being on with us, Kellie.
Thanks for having me, Bryce.
So we're going to chat about what an incoming Trump administration means for the grid, and we have quite a number of areas to cover. Before we jump in, Kellie, I know you're at an organization called Lot 16. We got connected when you were lead counsel there at the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your background and what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, right now I'm at the Lot 16. We're a combined GR and communications firm, and I'm an executive vice president and general counsel here. But you're right, I spent most of my career on the Senate, mostly for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where I was there for 17 years, including as chief counsel for then Chair Lisa Murkowski. But I've also done stints on the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Department of the Interior, and in private practice as a FERC regulatory attorney.
Thanks for being on with us. So let's maybe start on the legislative side. We'll ping around to all different areas of impact. The last couple of years have been really milestones, and some areas that we worked on with you a number of years back kind of laid the foundation for these significant legislative packages that have come up and really have generational impact on advancing grid capabilities. Are there areas of this that you see staying? Are there areas of this that you see that are targets? What's your kind of vantage point on where these things may head as we jump into a new administration?
Well, sure. I mean, you're right. There has been a lot of action in the last few years in the energy and climate front. And from my old committee, they were instrumental in helping get the IIJA, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, done last Congress. This was on a bipartisan basis. And before that, when my boss was still chair, they did the Energy Act of 2020 at the end of the Congress. And then, of course, we've got the Inflation Reduction Act. So I will say, I think the Energy Act of 2020 and the IIJA, since they went through the normal process, they were done on a bipartisan basis. I think that really has the longevity that you need behind bills that are passed that way. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed through the budget reconciliation process, which is designed to cut out the minority party. And that's exactly what it did. That's why no Republicans ended up voting for it last Congress. And, and this was also the situation for the Tax Cut and Jobs Act under the first Trump administration, done by reconciliation. Only Republicans voted for it. No Democrats voted for it. So that said, I think the IRA is in some jeopardy for next Congress. A Republican sweep means that reconciliation is back on the table, the reconciliation budget process, and taxes fit really neatly in there. Again, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was done that way. So is the Inflation Reduction Act. So Tax Cut and Jobs Act is expiring next year. We knew it was going to be a big tax year as a result because of that, regardless of who won. But with reconciliation now available as a tool, that's what Republicans will use. And to extend the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, I've heard estimates of about $4.3 trillion. So Republicans are going to need pay-fors, and some of those may be coming from the tax incentives that were made available as part of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yep. Rather than tangenting and taking our whole time there, maybe we'll loop back to some of the aspects of that are finding their way more specifically to the grid operators and energy innovation community. But let's jump in and just talk maybe at a high level about what you think can impact, DOE, Department of Energy, or the other main agencies there federally that have direct interface with the marketplace here for grid and energy ecosystems. How do you think they may change their focus here under a new administration?
Well, it's going to be interesting because we already know that Trump is creating a new National Energy Council. So that's going to be a big focus. And the person he's tapped for that is the Department of the Interior nominee, which is Governor Burgum from North Dakota. So it's not DOE, it's DOI. And really, that makes a lot of sense, I think, because DOE, until the IIJA and IRA, with all the money that was given to DOE is very much a research and development agency. DOI is actually doing a lot of the production and the permitting. So, you've got BOEM, you've got the energy production on the Outer Continental Shelf. You've got BLM, with a land management agency, the National Park Service doing permitting, Fish and Wildlife Service under Interior doing permitting. So it makes a lot of sense that Interior would be the head of the National Energy Council. But don't forget, DOE under statute and regulation is actually the lead federal agency for permitting onshore transmission facilities. So it'll be interesting to see what the council does with that, because again, that's in statute. Perhaps they want just DOI to lead on it. And I guess the other thing I'm looking at too is to see if the incoming administration makes some changes in the agencies. Every incoming administration does that. And, you might recall in the first Trump administration, they created CSER, and that's DOE's Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response Office. Biden came in and created some new offices within that agency, including the Grid Deployment Office, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, Undersecretary for Infrastructure. I say that because I imagine Trump is going to come in and reshuffle some of that as well. For instance, I don't think the Grid Deployment Office will be retained. I think a lot of this stuff might be put back under the Office of Electricity when it started. But really, we'll see how that plays out with reshuffling agencies. But the National Energy Council is going to be very, very big. It's supposed to be, we'll have to see which departments and agencies are included. Of course, in energy will be, Chris Wright will be on that council, but it's supposed to be agencies with permitting, regulating, producing, and generation, distribution, and transporting energy. So it could be a lot of agencies on this.
Yep. Well, you mentioned Burgum, and you just briefly mentioned right there. What sort of priorities do you see them bringing, given their past experience and interests, and maybe the general overall mandates that you see coming from the Trump administration? I guess I directed a little bit more towards Wright, but if you want to cover Burgum or any others that you see coming in.
Well, sure. Well, actually, I'll start with Trump, what his priorities might be for energy. And I think really, the first one is going to be energy independence and even dominance is what he's talking about for increased energy domestic production, both on the OCS and onshore. I think you're going to see, a focus on oil and gas leasing. I think for DOE, certainly the new administration is going to lift the pause on LNG exports and get that moving again. I think one of the other things they'll be doing is holding the Biden regs and any litigation in abeyance pending a government-wide review, and maybe redoing some of the tax credits, and we can get into that in a little bit. The Republicans will have the Congressional Review Act available to them as well, so they can try to claw back some of the Biden era regs. But the Trump administration might decide that they want to just revise some of the regs rather than claw them back. So for these incoming cabinet members, and you assume that they will be confirmed. And it's interesting that they both have focused a bit on innovation. So I think that's a very positive thing. They also want to decrease consumer energy prices, and that's something that Trump has said is very important to them. Again, they're going to be looking to increase base load generation and reducing electricity prices. And I think with that, they're really looking at the unprecedented increased demand brought about by AI and data centers, and they want to make sure that reliability is key as well. For Burgum, North Dakota gets 55% of its electricity from coal still, but a full almost 40% from wind. So they are sixth in the nation for wind. And I thought it was also interesting that North Dakota is part of a hydrogen hub. And these were those hydrogen hubs that were authorized as part of that bipartisan infrastructure law. So he's got the Heartland Hydrogen Hub, so he should be a hydrogen supporter. And North Dakota also has a state carbon neutral goal by 2030, although they do include the use of carbon capture, hydrogen, and biofuels to meet that. And for Chris Wright, he's got that fracking background, that innovation background. He's worked also in nuclear, solar, and geothermal. Actually, for nuclear, he's a board member of Oklo, which is a small modular reactor startup company. So I think there's a lot of commonality that they'll be bringing in for folks to work on with them on the Hill. But I think for Chris Wright, for energy, I think you could see like a focus for him on nuclear or even geothermal.
Yep. I want to come back to the tax credits. I want to come back to possible tariffs, which I don't think we've touched on yet. But I did want to touch on permitting, which you, I think, maybe addressed in your very, very opening remarks, because there's long been talks back to when you were actively there on the fact that really permitting, siting, any of these development steps are the log jams, right? They're causing the issues in many ways for advancing all kinds of energy resources coming onto the grid. do we have any chance in a lame duck? And if not, how does permitting get prioritized in a new administration?
Well, look, I never say never to my old committee, the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. They are the hardest working committee, and they, is particularly Chairman Manchin is relentless and really wants to get his permitting bill done before he retires by the end of the year. And so, this is something that Senate E&R had been working on for a full year, over a year, to try to put this permitting package together. They were able to report it out on a bipartisan basis last summer, and it has a lot of important changes, including giving FERC plenary siting authority for interstate transmission lines. And this would be something different than what's in law right now for that bifurcated DOE FERC authority. And also has a directed rulemaking for FERC to work on interregional transmission planning and cost allocation issues. So there's a lot of good that's in that bill. That said, things are tricky at the end of the lame duck. I always say that crazy things can happen in the lame duck, and it's not over until they gavel you out. But there are still some hurdles that are in front of Senate E&R's permitting bill. And, that includes the transmission provisions, which are strong, but we still have, outside groups who want tweaks to that. And that includes public power. And we saw a letter last week, jointly from APPA and NRECA in opposition to the Senate's permitting bill because of the transmission provisions. I understand EEI would like some tweaks to that as well. So there are some changes that need to be made. And now with a full Republican sweep, I think the calculation is being made about whether or not Republicans want this deal or whether they prefer to wait until next Congress and presumably get a better deal. And I'll just remind you, and I know that, you lived through this with us, but in 2016, my old committee we were in a formal conference. We were in a formal energy conference. We'd passed the bill off the Senate floor. The House had it as well. We had conferees. We were maybe 95% of the way there. And the Republican sweep happened, and our House Republican colleagues decided that they did not want to complete the conference. They wanted to wait until the next Congress when they controlled all the levers. So I am a little worried about the Senate E&R's bill now because it only got out of committee. This isn't something that's passed the Senate. It isn't something that's in a formal conference. That said, look, there's no requirement that it has to go as reported by the committee. You could see the parameters of a package that the House and Senate could agree on. And what I think that might be would be some transmission provisions with tweaks, some NEPA provisions for the House Republicans, and maybe that Rosemont mining fix is something that could get done. But again, it's never over until they gavel you out, and E&R has not given up just yet.
Well, we will see. Not long to wait, huh? Let's talk a bit about the Republican sweep that you had mentioned and what that can mean legislatively ahead. That could have implications for previously passed legislation. You mentioned tax credits, but that certainly could have implications for future legislation. What do you think the top of that list looks like? Because you've got all houses of Congress and the administration aligned there.
Yeah, so I think it's reconciliation and the Congressional Review Act. And for the budget reconciliation process, it's streamlined, but it's also multi-step. And the first step is you have to pass a budget resolution with reconciliation instructions to the committees, and they have to produce their legislation, and you have to make sure that it's bird rule proof. And this means that it has to have a budgetary impact. It can't be something that's extraneous. This is, by the way, a Senate requirement that the House does not like that they have to comply with. But because this is how a bill becomes a law in a conference situation, and the final bill that gets sent to the president for his signature has to be bird rule compliant. So the House reluctantly has to also abide by the bird rule at that stage, not when they actually try to pass it from their first time, just from the House. But so it's a multi-step process, but it's one that will absolutely be undertaken because it's just a simple majority needed. So in the Senate, we should have 53 Republican votes, but it's not a filibuster-proof, 60 plus votes. So that's why reconciliation is so attractive. And again, taxes fit really neatly. They are bird rule compliant. into reconciliation, and that's why it's going to be used. But the other thing that Republicans need to look at the very beginning of next Congress is the Congressional Review Act, because that's got a clock attached to it. That is 60 session days, which can be longer than just 60 calendar days, 60 session days. And anything that has been finalized towards the end of the Biden administration, and what CRS is telling us the look back date is likely August 1st. Any regulations that have been finalized from August 1st until the end of this year will be subject to Congressional Review Act potential clawback. And that just means that the Congress would disapprove of that regulation, the president would sign it, and really kind of the big stick behind it is if it's successful, the agencies are not allowed to promulgate anything substantially similar in the future. So it's a big tool, and one that was used very successfully in the first Trump administration. In fact, he's the one who's used it the most. One of the things I'm hearing is that perhaps the current administration will not finalize some of their rules on their way out to prevent a CRA clawback from a full Republican Congress.
And the timing of that reconciliation package, I've heard some dates, but do you have any best estimates on when that might be?
Well, I think it's all going to depend on, what the appropriations cycle is. Like, we're waiting right now, we're on a CR until December 20th, and Congress needs to figure out how they're going to keep the government funded beyond that. The House is talking about perhaps a short-term CR into March. The Senate would like an omnibus appropriations measure that takes you through the end of the fiscal year. So I think that might be the thing that they have to start with if we're on a short term. But then they have to just move as quickly as possible to do the budget resolution, because that is the necessary first step. You could make it as quick as by April. I think that would be moving very, very fast to get reconciliation done. But, certainly within the first year, they could easily do that.
That's about what I was hearing. A bit of a high question, but I'm curious to know your perspectives on this. Do you think that the balance of the role of federal government in particular, but government and industry, is going to shift with regards to supporting innovation, in particular on energy and the grid? Or do you see some level of continuity there with the new administration? How do you think it seems like that changed quite a bit with the creation of these various programs and packages in the last 4 years? Where do you think that goes in the new administration?
Well, and I think that comes down to whether or not these programs are in statute or not. And if they're in statute, you're still going to have to do them. I will say the incoming administration has focused a lot. They've talked a lot about innovation and wanting to focus on innovation over regulation to solve some of these problems and to kind of decrease energy prices, in particular electricity prices. DOE, of course, is Christopher Wright will have, overseeing the 17 national labs. I used to work for Chairman Domenici. He's got 2 labs in New Mexico. They're extraordinary. They're doing amazing work on cybersecurity and grid reliability. So I'm sure that is something that is going to continue in the new administration. As far as innovation, they do seem committed to it. Again, we've seen the incoming Interior Secretary and maybe Energy Czar liking hydrogen and having a hydrogen hub. And so I think that's all very positive.
So I think 2 more questions. And you just mentioned it, grid resilience, right? The impact to our communities, to economies, to individuals from all the name storms, all of the disruptions has been just so highly impactful. And the grid often takes the brunt of these events. How do you see the federal government and DOE continuing to be involved to ensure that we have resilient grid systems that are able to withstand everything that's thrown at us?
Yeah, I do think the incoming administration understands that a strong grid system is needed to ensure reliability. I know they understand that. And again, as we already discussed, they're looking at the unprecedented demand that is coming in from AI and data centers and knowing that they've got to address that. I think NERC is going to have a big role in it, as well as the nation's electric reliability organization, and FERC, of course, because they just did their full day conference on co-location of large generational resources. They have an order out on that now. And, DOE is still going to be involved, particularly if the Senate energy bill does not get enacted. Because if the Senate energy permitting bill gets enacted, DOE is going to be cut out of the backstop siting authority that it has right now for transmission facilities. But if the status quo is maintained, DOE will still be authorized to designate NICHEs, the National Interest Electric Transmission Corridors. They'll still have the authority to do their National Transmission Needs Study, which is so important with the forward-looking phase of what this country is going to need. So I think it's going to be kind of a combination of efforts. But I do think if EPRA is enacted, the focus goes more on FERC than maybe on DOE.
Great. All right. So our last question, it's a short one. If you had any advice for the incoming Trump 2.0 administration, what would you offer? What would you share?
Well, it would have been to focus on your nominations and stand up your government as soon as possible. But that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they've learned from the first time it can take a while to get a government stood up. And, one of the things we've been hearing, if Harris had won, that she'd been seriously considering keeping the Bush cabinet in place, particularly if she was faced with a Republican-controlled Senate, just to have her government up and running. So Trump is going to get his people up and confirmed. It should be, for most of them, fairly easy with 53 Republican senators to go through the normal process. I know there have been some talks about recess appointments. I think those are a little trickier to do, frankly, because you need 60 votes in the Senate to vote yourself into recess, and the Dems aren't going to do that. But yes, my advice would have been stand up your government, which he's already doing, but also keep the lines of communications open with the Hill. Talk to your leadership, be talking to your committees, about how they can help with the agenda and move it forward. Because reconciliation doesn't work for everything. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. And so bipartisan pieces of legislation are really going to be the most durable.
Well, Kellie Donnelly, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Active time, the coming days and weeks are going to be really interesting, very impactful for all of the community. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Chats, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.